The family of Agnes Wanjiru, a young Kenyan mother murdered by British troops almost a decade ago, is now filing charges to demand answers over her death. The brother-in-law of the murdered Kenyan woman speaks here about his pain and suffering.
9 British soldiers joked about her death on social media several years later. The family now hope this fresh investigation will give them their answers they so desperately need.
I feel a lot of pain when I remember Agnes. We brought her up well, and just as she was settling down, her life was taken away, leaving us to fend for her young child. It's my hope that this child will get justice.
Hello, I'm Mubarak Kenya, and a warm welcome to Africa Today, a weekly program that gives you an alternative view of events making headlines in Africa. Today we are focusing on the reopening of the file of a young Kenyan woman brutally murdered by British troops training in central Kenya in 2012. Kenyan members of parliament now say they're having attempts to cover up the murder. In the second part of our program, we shall look at the exaggerated reports of the return of some African artifacts looted by Western countries, especially France. The question many are asking is this: are Western countries willing to return every single artifact they stole from Africa? Stay with us and send us your comments through our social media handle as you watch.
Kenyan woman murdered by British troops. The body of 21-year-old Kenyan woman Agnes Wanjiru was found in 2012 after she went out partying with British troops at a hotel in the central Kenyan town of Nanyuki, where the British Army has a permanent garrison. Last October, one of the troops involved confessed to killing Wanjiru, and now the family of the murdered woman is demanding for justice. The governor of Kenya's Laikipia County, where the murder took place, says the crime brings back memories of atrocities committed by Britain during the colonial rule.
The revelations have reignited calls for an independent investigation and justice for Wanjiru. Kenyan authorities have announced that they are reopening the case. The sister of the murdered Kenyan is emotional over the revival of the murder file.
Recently, when the media started airing the story, it opened old wounds. It's like Agnes has just died. It has even affected her daughter, but we had to let her know what is going on. I pray that God grants the British government the wisdom to handle this case well. When I think of Agnes, I remember how happy she was. She loved to sing. She taught my youngest daughter how to sing. The person who killed Agnes should face the law, because the child who was orphaned has suffered a lot. Bearing in mind she was just 5 months old, even feeding at that time was difficult.
Well, for more on this murder file involving British troops in Kenya, my colleague contacted Patrick Gadara, a writer and political cartoonist. He's also the curator of the Kenyan news website, The Elephant. Now, Mr. Gadara first explains here on why it has taken almost 10 years for this case to come back to limelight.
The case of Agnes Wanjiru has taken so long simply because once she was killed initially by allegedly by the British soldiers, she was missing for about 2 months. Before her body was actually recovered from a septic tank. And by the time she was found, her body was found, the soldiers had already left the country. And then that was the initial delay. Then there was also sort of quite a bit of delay in setting up an inquiry that then decided that the British soldiers were most likely responsible for her death. And in addition to that, there was quite a lot of laxity in terms of both governments in following up the case.
Well, the Defense and Foreign Relations Committee in Kenya's parliament has raised concerns that the authorities could be engaged in cover-up, hence delay in Agnes Wanjiru's murder case.
It's a scandal of a cover-up. Is purely because the junior officers reported to their seniors, and their seniors never took necessary action.
We asked Mr. Gadara to give us his take on why Britain's Ministry of Defense deliberately refused to investigate the brutal murder of Wanjiru in 2012 amid reports of a plot to cover up this heinous crime.
There was a deliberate attempt to cover it up, or at least there was some hope that it would go away. I think we have seen in Kenya quite a number of cases involving British and even American soldiers and sailors, where they have come and committed crimes here, killed people, killed animals, started fires, and stuff, and then kind of disappeared. So when they go away and we don't really see justice done, we don't see them being pursued, either by our own authorities here in Kenya or by the British or American authorities. So this is not a new thing. It's not the first time. And we need to keep in mind that there has been, since colonial days, a pattern where atrocities committed against locals are treated as if they are not very serious, and there is a tendency to sweep them under the rug.
Allegations against British troops serving in Kenya and elsewhere around the world have dogged the British government and military.
The UK has nothing to hide here. We want these investigations to be dealt with as quickly as possible. We want those responsible to be brought to justice.
Considering the foregoing, many are now wondering if there are any prospects for justice in this case, particularly considering the fact that British troops walked away scot-free after committing horrendous crimes in Kenya and elsewhere in the world. So, are the prospects quite slim?
I think the prospects are still quite slim. And again, it depends on what you define as justice. Right now, there is lots of talk of getting the soldiers extradited to Kenya to stand trial here. But the fact that you're seeing the names of the soldiers are still being kept secret, we still don't know who they are, the people who are to be extradited, means that it's quite questionable whether there is a lot of will to pursue this on a serious way. The other thing to think about is that given the time lag that we've had, more than 10 years, is the evidence still there to hold them guilty and to hold them accountable for this? So I think there's quite a lot of questions as to whether we can really secure a guilty verdict. And even if we were to get a guilty verdict, what would be the punishment? What would be a requisite punishment? Would they be, for example, jailed in Kenya, in Kenyan prisons? Or would we have a situation where they are sentenced here and then sent to a prison in the UK?
Now, Kenyan members of parliament have threatened to reject a renewed military agreement signed recently between the country and Britain unless suspects in the killing of Agnes Wanjiru are extradited and prosecuted according to Kenyan laws.
So until we have concrete evidence to suggest that the Kenya government is looking into this matter and the culprit actually being brought back to Kenya to face our criminal justice system, then there's a time now we can probably append our signatures.
Now, Mr. Gadara speaks here about this military deal now that members of parliament in Kenya have threatened to shoot it down.
Well, I think it's a good question. I mean, why should we be giving British soldiers space to come in and do their military exercises here? Why don't they do them back at home? You know, and also, as you mentioned, given the fact that we have these sorts of conflicts between locals and the troops, we know, like, for example, there was a big issue about unexploded munitions being left lying around and people stepping on them or handling them and ending up getting injured. You know, and there was a court case and some compensation that was ordered paid. But it is still an issue. You know, why should we be allowing it? This is 60 years after independence. What are these deals about? And it's really important to remember that these are not agreements that the ordinary citizens are involved in. You know, they are really government-to-government ones. They take really very little account of whether or not the local population wants this military people here. You know, so I think for me it's quite problematic. I think I see no reason and no justification for continuing to host foreign military people on our soil, especially when our people are having to pay such a high price for it.
Kenya's Defense Cabinet Secretary has acknowledged that justice has been delayed for the woman murdered by British troops, but has promised to ensure justice is served.
Indeed, justice has been delayed for Agnes Wanjiru and her young child, but it must not be denied. We must do everything to ensure, invoking the powers provided under the Defense Cooperation Agreement, to ensure that that is done.
The crimes committed by British troops in Kenya have gone unpunished, contrary to the agreement between the two countries. Some people believe this level of impunity by the British military is historical.
Historically, there has been a sense of impunity. I mean, if you go back 60 years to the Mau Mau conflict in the 1950s, we have till today people who are still alive who committed terrible atrocities against the local population. You know, people who tortured people in the concentration camps that were set up, who ran these concentration camps, people who murdered people, you know, who were there. They are old now, but there has been absolutely no attempt to hold them to account for this. And we know that the British actually took out in 1963, just prior to independence, they stole a huge cache of documents, not just from Kenya, but from their colonies around the world, you know, in an attempt to actually hide the fact that these atrocities happened.
This is while Nuruddin Haji, Kenya's Director of Public Prosecutions, says the government would request extradition of troops involved in the murder to face charges in Kenya.
It's going on well. I think as you saw on Friday, the DCI met with the British officials, and we have agreed on the best way to move. The court had, in the inquest, indicated that we proceed with the case, and after compilation by the DCI, we will be ready to proceed accordingly.
We asked Mr. Gadhara to give us his final thoughts on what it will take to solve the Agnes Wanjiru murder file.
Well, there's a number of things I think are required to be done. The first is there has to be a serious, thorough, unfettered investigation of what happened in the case of Agnes Wanjiru, and a full-bodied prosecution here in Kenya, you know, of the soldiers. I think we need to get away from the impression that's created right now of this sort of anonymous soldiers. They need to be named. We need to know who they are, and we need to see that using the phrase that they like using, that no stone is left unturned in pushing for accountability for it. But beyond that, I think there needs to be serious discussions about why it is we have these soldiers from the British still active here in Kenya, why are they doing trainings here, and what are the safeguards, if any, for local people so that we don't see this happen again.
Well, thanks, Mr. Gadhara, Kenyan writer and cartoonist. Unfortunately, our time is up for today. Here at Africa Today, we shall continue following up the case of Agnes Wanjiru as the family seeks prosecution of British troops involved in this gruesome murder. We now take a short break, and when we come back, we shall focus on how most of Africa's stolen art is still stashed in Western countries, despite exaggerated reports of the return of some of the looted artifacts. Stay with us.
Stolen African art stashed in Western museums.
The French government has returned some 26 artworks it looted from Benin. Now, this is just a fraction of thousands of items stolen by France in the 19th century from Benin, including from its palaces of Abomey, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Some of these artifacts were stolen by colonial administrators, troops or doctors and passed down to descendants. Many of these looted artifacts are still in private collections, but hundreds of thousands are kept in museums across Europe and North America.
Speaking in Paris during the signing of an agreement to bring back the stolen art, Benin's president said the return of the 26 pieces is just a first step.
We hope that the restitution of these 26 works of art is just a first step in the ambitious process of restituting heritage pieces.
Now, for more on the struggle for return of all looted African artifacts stashed in European and North American museums, my colleague contacted Joseph Ochieno, a writer and African affairs analyst. Now, we first asked Mr. Ochieno his take on why Western countries are suddenly returning some of the cultural heritage items they looted in Africa.
This is a very important question, and I think it's the case that credit to media agencies like yourselves, credit to the campaigns by various African communities, organizations, and indeed a few progressive Western academic institutions, that following slavery and beyond slavery, it's time that now Africa should be able to have what belongs to it. The cultural artifacts were, like, if you like, amongst those things that very much determined the realities and the backbone of our civilizations. And they were looted and stolen. And of course, these are prized items that directly relate and link with the African communities. But beyond that, I think it is also the case that as the world moves on, a much more younger generation of Western citizens and indeed scholars are becoming part of the campaign for fairness and global justice. And that must therefore really include questions of artifacts or whatever other material items will have been looted from either Africa or any of the rest of the other worlds that were by and large colonized by Western powers.
According to some estimates, the Kwai Branly Museum in Paris alone holds some 70,000 African objects, yet Mehran handed over only 26 artifacts to Benin amid a media circus. A curator from a museum in Benin speaks before the return of the looted artifacts in this Paris museum.
These art pieces are of essential importance for Benin. It has been more than a century that these pieces have been removed from their historical context. These artifacts returning to the country today is just historical for the people of Benin.
Now, considering the high number of looted African artifacts being held in Western museums, is this highly publicized return of just a few of the looted items meant to hoodwink the public?
It was purely that, hoodwink, and I think it's scandalous, isn't it? Because up to 90% or thereabouts of precious African artifacts are held in either Western museum or libraries. So I think this is one of the things that needs to be done, and that is that African governments, African advocacy groups, and indeed global organizations, including news media like Press TV as we talk today, should double their efforts in making sure that these loots are actually returned not only to Africa, but respective African communities. This is direct theft that took place hundreds of years ago, but it's the direct theft that now that has been established that who stole and where these items should be returned to the owners.
The president of Benin, Patrice Talon, made it clear that the handover was the first step in a large-scale restitution process. We asked Mr. Ochieno if there is any legal or political mechanism to compel European colonial powers to return all the artifacts they stole from Africa.
I think there would be a very important legal case. There must be a really important legal basis on which, as I said, the principal property and ownership, that if these were items that were taken from Africans by force and against the wills of many Africans, in many cases brutalizing and killing the owners of these items, there's no reason why a legal test case is not put in place, number one. But number two, the Africans continue to advocate for reparations, including for and around slavery. I would be one of those people who would join part of that campaign and make sure that this is actually enhanced. That is both legally and indeed politically. But beyond that, I think African governments today should have the ability and the capacity to demand that these items are actually returned, and so are African academic institutions. So those are political pressures. But beyond that, I think African civil society organizations, and indeed possibly young African academicians, can actually opt to boycott some of the institutions that hold these items. That is to put pressure. Finally, I think global agencies like the United Nations should surely be the space where these conversations should be able to take place and to compel Western governments to return what really is not theirs and what is really, really African.
26 works of art stolen by France returned to Benin on the 10th of November. This was a landmark in the long fight by African countries to recover looted artifacts. A member of one of Benin's royal families believes the return is important for young people in the country.
I think the youth should take a keen interest in the museum that will be built. Because I think the youth is a bit lost in terms of tradition.
Are the masses in Africa, especially the youth, aware of the continent's artifacts looted by Western countries during the colonial period?
Part of the challenge is that many Africans possibly don't even know the fact that this kind of act does exist. Many of the African governments continue today, in many cases, to work and relate with many of these Western organizations, and so therefore calm down their citizens. But beyond that, going forward, as I said, these are opportunities for tourism. These are opportunities for reclaiming our civilization. And thanks to programs like yourself, these matters and subjects must be on the national tape. But guess what? While I know this through my research, campaigns and advocacy, I'm not quite sure how many nation states televisions had these subjects that hit the headlines. Think about South Africa, possibly the most established in terms of academia and universities and institutions of learning and research. In South Africa, I doubt. In Egypt, I doubt. In big Nigeria, I doubt. In Kenya, I doubt. So that tells you very, very few mainstream media organizations on the continent, whether state or perhaps private, would necessarily have covered this. So your guess is as well as mine. How are these things and these matters going to reach the conversational tables of average African citizenry?
Despite the return of the looted artifacts being a drop in the ocean, the people of Benin are jubilant and hopeful that this will be the start of full restitution.
Today we're so happy about what's happening in our country. We're so happy. What we've been looking for, it's for our artwork to come back to us.
Finally, we asked Mr. Ochieno, what is the significance of the restitution of stolen artifacts to the African people?
Ability that we can begin to have conversations to heal the past and to begin to move forward. And there is no other better way of healing the past than merely returning what is purely African. Because one of the things, and a good case would be made, both politically and legally, that not only is it the return of these items good enough, but imagine you borrowing, getting a loan, even if it's only 1% per annum, and is for over 130 or 150 years. How much would it be? So no, I think it's in the best interest of Western governments and these institutions to return our staff under whatever circumstance. But going forward, I hope Africans will join part of this conversation and debate and demand for the return of these items, all of it really, but also make sure that in the event that there is a difficulty in returning, we make it as much a political case and a political question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ochieno. There you have it. He says African people must insist on the return of all artifacts looted by Western countries during the era of colonialism. On that note, we come to the end of this week's edition of Africa Today. So drop us a line through our social media handle and let us know your opinion. You can also watch this episode and all our previous shows on our website, presstv.ir. It was great having you, and thanks a lot for watching. Goodbye for now, and God bless you.